What is going on, everybody? Welcome into an episode of Fantasy Alarm Sports Talk. I'm your host, Howard Bender. Joining me today, Ryan Hallam. Ryan, we haven't gotten to do many of these one-on-ones here. There's a lot going on in the world of sports. First of all, before we get to really what's steaming my clams right now in the NFL, let me just ask how you doing, buddy?
Doing okay. I'm not having a bad day. It's 3 o'clock. It's a little hot here, but I'm having better days than other people.
New haircut?
Yes, quarantine haircut number 2, the amateur edition.
Did your wife do it? Did you do it?
Oh no, she did.
Does she use a Flowbee?
No, just clippers though. But we haven't like the big. It's like the 6 on the top, the 2 on the sides, blended in a little. It doesn't take a lot to make this happen. It really doesn't.
You're looking sharp. But yeah, I've grown to more and more hats. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Speaking of hats, I've got to make a quick swap here from my FA hat. Oh, yeah. How about that one right there? So
I will say one more thing that I did, because she did the hair, but we kind of missed the eyebrow thing. So yesterday I saw a couple of really like weird scientist kind of ones. So I plucked them, and wow, I would never be. I'd be the worst woman in the world. It hurt so bad. I was almost in tears. So shout out to all you girls who just like pull them all out. Either you're a masochist or what, but man, that did not feel good at all.
Yeah, my eyebrows get a little out of control. It's like you ever see the penguins that have like the kind of what it looks like for me as well. Anyway, let me just give a quick shout out here to Charles Kangas, aka the Kangas Man, throwing me a little lid there a couple of years ago when he and I were first talking, doing some mock drafts together. He was calling in on the radio show. I deemed him the Kangas Man, the fantasy superhero, because he was all in on every sport, and he was good to go for fantasy talk for anything. So I threw that down there, and now I got my own little Kangas Man hat. So shout out to you, brother. Thank you so much for the hat, and look forward to the day when we can chat again, compete in a couple of leagues, and do all of that. Now, we'll just jump right into the wonderful sports world here. I got to tell you, man, this has just been absolutely driving me insane, is the talk now of Dalvin Cook with the potential holdout. And I'll tell you why. It's a bad trend that we're seeing right now in the NFL. Le'Veon Bell, Melvin Gordon, Ezekiel Elliott. Now, Joe Mixon said something about a month or so ago, or, it was like right near the NFL draft, where Mixon said that he would, think about holding out. Dalvin Cook now. This is let's talk about the theoretical aspect of it first before we get to the fantasy impact. But like, how do we get this to stop in the NFL? Like, what's to stop every single guy who's working off of his rookie contract, whether he has the 5th-year option on his deal or he doesn't have the 5th-year option on his deal? How do we get this trend to stop? Because right now it's really getting ugly.
Well, here's the first thing is I only really think a few guys are going to be able to do this for a couple of reasons. And what we need to have happen is to what happened to Melvin Gordon last year. He sat out, the first 6 or 7 weeks, came back, wasn't very good. Austin Eckler continued to play well in his stead, and then he didn't get the contract he thought he was going to this offseason. So I don't understand of all positions running backs for the ones that do it. Their shelf life, I understand, is the shortest, but they're also more interchangeable than any other position, in my opinion, on the football field. We see guys come out of college every year that come in and succeed. We see, every year they get hurt, and the guy who comes up behind them is just as good, if not better. So of all the people to have the least amount of leverage, it's running backs continue to do this. Christian McCaffrey obviously didn't have to. Zeke, we all knew that wasn't going to, he knew the Cowboys were going to pay him. But I don't know what's going to happen with Cook. I think they're going to pay him. They're going to have to. But it's only, to me, the elite of the elite who's even going to be able to attempt to pull this off. And if it happens a couple more times like Gordon, where it didn't happen the way they thought it was going to, then I think we'll see this stop.
I'm going to bring this up on the Fantasy Alarm Roundtable discussion later on today, 5 p.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. If you guys want to tune in, because I'm curious. Jim Bowden, Jen Piacenti, Adam Ronis, John and Pemba, and Justin Fensterman are going to join me. So I figured it's just good to get as many different opinions on this as possible. I mean, because to me, here you go. Like, I like Dalvin Cook's talent, but you miss an entire year with a torn ACL.
Yep.
Right. You get hurt towards the tail end of last year, and you miss a couple of games. You've got Alex Madison sitting behind you on the depth chart, and let's face it, what did Gary Kubiak and Rick Dennison do? They breed 1,000-yard rushers. I mean, you look at what they did in Denver. Reuben Drones, Mike Anderson. I mean, some of these names, Orlandis Gary, like some of these names are a joke. You see what they did in Houston. Steve Slayton, Arian Foster. These guys all became, more than just fantasy relevant. I mean, they became leading rushers in the NFL. And so, you look at that as Dalvin Cook and say, well, this is their system. I ran successfully in that. Alex Madison looked pretty good in that. So what makes me think that the Vikings aren't just going to say, "Oh, F you, we're done," and you can renegotiate all you want. You want to hold out, go ahead, hold out. You become a restricted free agent as opposed to an unrestricted free agent next year because there is no fifth-year option on your deal, and we've got 2 years more of control of Alex Madison before he decides to turn around and say, "I'm going to hold out." Like, what's stopping the Vikings from doing that?
They very well might, and if I remember correctly, isn't there a lot bigger penalties for holding out under the latest agreement than there was previously? Don't they lose like a lot of money per day for holding out, I thought. So, I mean, this is another thing working against Cook. So, yeah, not only the system, but, a young, good guy behind him. Even Mike Boone wasn't bad at the end of last year. So it wasn't, it doesn't have to be a thoroughbred running back to that runs pretty well. It is a team that focuses on the run. Even Amir Abdullah, catching passes out of the backfield, they did okay when he was out last year. We'll see. I mean, you'd think the fan base would revolt a little bit if they let him go. But, I mean, I don't know how much that matters to NFL teams. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. It seemed like for how definitive he was yesterday that he's really serious about this, and maybe the same thing's going to happen. It happened with Gordon last year, and fantasy football moves on as far as that aspect is concerned. He's great, but there's another one coming right behind him.
That's my concern right there, especially when you're talking about the system that we've seen. Lev Bell held out for an entire year, and Pittsburgh was like, oh, okay, we got a couple of guys who know how to run in this system. That's one of the reasons why in the NFL Draft Guide, which just got launched by Fantasy Alarm yesterday, you can go to fantasyalarm.com/NFL Draft Guide, get that 50% off early bird special. But I mean, when talking about that, and we talk about systems and preaching, understanding, is the player making the system, or is the system making the player? Like, that's really, chicken and egg kind of thing.
Not only the system, but the line is such a huge part of it. On both sides of the ball, it's like football is won and lost in the trenches. You can have a superstar quarterback or an average. We've seen Joe Flacco, we've seen Trent Dilfer win Super Bowls. A lot of it also has to deal with their defense, but the offensive line is so huge. Look, Ezekiel is great, but I guarantee there's some lower level guys who could look really, really good behind that Cowboys line. And Minnesota's got a good run blocking offensive line. So, yeah, they will skip a beat a little, I think, without him, but I don't think it's anything that's going to be monumental if it's Madison. And not that there's really Super Bowl contenders in my mind anyway, but I feel like if Cook does hold out into the season, it's not going to end well for him.
Well, and I don't think it's going to end well either. I'm sure that some people believe that the talent is as such, and Minnesota does have that track record of, giving into these guys and signing, offering up extensions before training camp happens. So, regardless of which side you're on, let's talk about for fantasy purposes right now. Right now, there are a lot of people doing best ball drafts. John and Pemba's running a bunch of BB10s over there. We're going to start doing a number of drafts. The Draft Masters over at rtsports.com. And Justin Vreeland's going to be running those drafts. So, let's start off in the best ball format here right now. Are you afraid to take Dalvin Cook really where his ADP is, which is at the top 5
First
overall?
No, not in June 9th. Certainly there's a risk. And like we said, we saw Zeke hold out for a long time last year and then Gordon into the season. And he did, for everything we saw, sounded really, really convincing. But I have a hard time believing it. Like I said, with the other extra penalty for holding out, it's not like he's exactly pulling in $12 million a year right now. So it was designed to make this, hurt these guys who wanted to hold out. As of now, like you said, with Minnesota's history of paying people, I still think it's going to get done. But I'd probably do a little handcuffing if I'm drafting him right now, where I don't normally do that. I think you want both part of the Vikings backfield if you're drafting on June 9th.
Okay, so you, Ryan Hallam, you're not touching him in best ball drafts right now. You figure...
No, I'm not adjusting my strategy. If I liked him, I'd take him. But I'd take Madison earlier.
I'm asking you, do you like him?
Yeah, I do.
Would you take him?
Top 5?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I probably would. Yeah. McCaffrey, Elliott, Barkley, Michael Thomas. He's probably right there. I mean, there's other guys who are just as good. Would you take Alvin Kamara or somebody along those lines? I'd still take Cook. I'm not that worried about it today.
Okay. Alex Madison sitting with an ADP somewhere around, I think it's like the 10th round right now. If you're drafting Cook right now, let's say you take a 5th, 6th, 7th spot in your draft, yep, and you see him there and you're like, boom, I'm not adjusting my strategy. I'm taking Dalvin Cook. It's the best player on the board. How do you reach at all on Madison to make sure that you lock it down, better safe than sorry type of a thing? Or do you just try and draft Madison as is and hope that you find him in the 10th round?
I think in this case, you have to reach a little bit, not only for the possibility of the holdout, but even if Cook does sign, we've talked already about his history of injury problems. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword that with a guy like Cook, who hasn't played a full season in 3 years, and he only missed 2 games last year, and one was the last week of the season where they couldn't, improve their seeding. He's a guy you might want to think about handcuffing in any scenario. So this just kind of makes it a little more important that maybe in the 8th round, you might want to take a gander and hope that you can hit, with a little bit of a sleeper towards the end of the draft where you normally might be taking Madison. Okay.
How long of a holdout before you do start changing your draft strategy? Like when do you, we're here in early June right now. So what is it today, the 9th?
Today's the 9th.
All right. So if he holds out until July 15th and they finally come to between now and July 15th, stay the course here, or do you start changing up your strategy a little earlier?
No, I think that's about right. I don't assume that there's probably going to be a lot of talks anytime soon. I got to figure that the team's not in any rush to do this, that they're going to try to talk him down out of it or talk his representatives out of it. But I think, middle to late July, things are getting a little more serious. But it's still a long way to go. And I don't. There's not a lot going on in football right now. I know we all jonesing for it because there's nothing else, but so every little thing is being blown into a big story right now. But I think you're good. I mean, he doesn't need a lot of preseason. This is going to be his 4th year, so even if he didn't play till the 3rd preseason game, I don't think that would really hinder his regular season at all.
How far into training camp, if he holds out, do you start getting a little nervous?
August 1st. Then I get nervous. And outside of best ball drafts, there's not a lot of drafts going on, in July. Some people are sneaking up, and we have the fishbowl, obviously. So that's going to be real interesting to see where he goes there. I think most people are drafting in August at this point. If you're drafted August 1st or later, and he's still it's getting ugly between the two sides, or they haven't talked, or he's still chirping about what's going on and disrespecting, then I'd really start to get worried.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. August 1st, I can dig with that. I can definitely get down with that.
Are you drafting him?
What's that?
Are you drafting him?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely drafting him still.
Okay.
I'm drafting him, and for me, it's less about the player and more about the scheme. like when it comes to Minnesota, like I'll draft Dalvin Cook if, depending on where I am in that first round. I mean, as long as I'm not like second, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
or yeah, second, I wouldn't do it because I have Dalvin ranked third overall. I like him over Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, the real question that I have here is when you're looking at the Dallas Cowboys, they draft a guy like CeeDee Lamb because they don't want to let that go by. But, what kind of a system are they really going to, are they going to be running there? And are they going to give the volume to Ezekiel Elliott? Like, how many times did we see Mike McCarthy turn around and say, I don't want to deal with the ground game. I want to deal more with the aerial attack. And I mean, that was one of the big issues for him.
Yeah, and I did a piece this week in my quarterback preview, like a Dak versus Kyler Murray kind of thing. And it'd be interesting to see what the Dallas offense is because they kept the offensive coordinator and brought in Mike McCarthy at head coach. So, Garrett's system was more aerial, where McCarthy's is a little more West Coast. So I'm kind of interested to see if McCarthy comes in and implements his system, completely, or if he does a little, hybrid thing with Kellen Moore, and if it's a little bit of both. But a lot of games last year they did get away from Zeke, probably more than they should have. I mean, Prescott threw the ball a ridiculous number of times, more than ever in his career. So it'll be interesting to see if that impacts Zeke at all. But the other thing I saw on Twitter that I wanted to ask you, Dynasty, buying and selling Cook and Madison. Are you dumping Cook in Dynasty? Are you all over buying Madison in Dynasty, or is this changes nothing as of now?
I'm in 2 dynasty leagues that I really care about and pay attention to, and I've got Cook and Madison in both of them.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So yeah, that's not a concern. Like, I had Dalvin Cook from, a couple of years back. I was all in on him, his rookie campaign. When Minnesota drafted Alex Madison, I made sure that he was, on my radar and made sure that I could maintain that. So, for me, that's not so much of an issue as far as that goes. Listen, I'll buy all the Dalvin Cook shares I can possibly buy if people are going to start to give them up. Am I taking a risk? Yeah, sure, but it's a dynasty league, so I feel pretty comfortable about the risk. I'm not sitting there, dropping a first round draft choice. I took Dalvin Cook his rookie season. He definitely wasn't a first rounder at that point. So I'm okay with that. Again, for me, it's, I look at just the redraft for this year. Because I think that's really where, that's where Bob from accounting's playing. That's one of the things that we want to do. So, all right. So we'll switch gears here a little bit. Let's stay with some football. One of the things that we're starting to see creep out, I mean, listen, we've talked, a lot about whether or not we trust a lot of the rookies because of this pandemic, because they haven't been able to work out and play with their teammates. And my feeling is that that's, unless they get into camp really soon, that's going to be, an issue as far as development goes. Now we're seeing a lot of stories coming out. Jared Stidham's been working out with Julian Edelman for the last, however long that's been over there. We saw Big Ben throwing to Juju Smith-Schuster. We've seen Drew Lock and Jerry Jeudy hanging out together. So does this raise the value of any of these guys to you at all, seeing as how they are kind of, they're getting in as much time together as they can?
I certainly don't think it hurts by any stretch. I think it's kind of a situation by situation. Ben obviously missed last year, so him getting any reps with his guys certainly helps. Locke and Jeudy, 2 young players. Of course, they need to get as much time as they possibly can together. Stidham, it's going to be his first chance to start. Edelman doesn't really exactly run a lot of complicated routes. It's 8 yards over the middle and sit down. I don't know how complicated that is that they need to find too much timing together, but it definitely helps. That was a big reason that I'm not so bullish on a lot of rookies this year. It was very interested to see what happens and how much time they get and how much, because it's not just running routes. I mean, especially for like running backs, you get, if they can't block, they don't play. And running and wide receivers too. I mean, there's not as much, but I mean there's other factors coming into playing time for young players other than just catching the ball. So, but definitely timing and chemistry with your quarterback. I don't think it hurts. It doesn't make me rocket anyone up my draft board, but maybe gives me a little bit more confidence with some of these guys I see out there and getting some extra time.
All right, let's look at some ADP then and figure out does Julian. I mean, how do you feel? How do you feel about Julian Edelman with Jared Stidham anyway? I mean, Edelman went from being Brady's go-to guy, now it's Stidham. But Edelman's the last man standing from the regime, so obviously he's got the ear of the locker room. He's got the respect from the younger players. Does this keep Edelman at that level that we've seen him drafted in years past?
I think he's outside the top 24 for me at this point. It helps in PPR because he obviously is going to be a big target of Stidham's. You have to believe. You can't believe. A new quarterback, they find new receivers, but I mean, this guy's just been around forever and Mr. Reliable. But he said he's also getting older and he deals with more injuries every year, and they seem to pile up. He seems to miss a little bit more time. As much as he's a warrior and tries to do anything to stay on the field, Father Time is undefeated except for Barry Bonds. So it gets everybody eventually, and you can definitely see him losing a step. He's still someone out there. He's still definitely rosterable, but I'd be more comfortable if he was my third at this point, especially with a first-time starter or Brian Hoyer.
Yeah. It's definitely going to be interesting over there. What about besides wide receivers? How about tight ends? Because now there's a report out there saying that Matt Ryan was on a team Zoom call and was talking up Hayden Hurst. Where's the quote here? Fastest and most athletic tight ends I've ever played with. That's coming from Matty Ice, who, I mean, really just, utilized Austin Hooper in a major way last year. Does this kind of, I mean, Hayden Hurst has been sort of like that sleeper darling pick for a lot of people that, assuming that the targets vacated by Austin Hooper are just going to default over to Hurst, which never really works like that. And we know that Calvin Ridley's going to see an increase in his workload, but does hearing Matt Ryan talk about Hayden Hurst like that, does that kind of bump his value up for you at all?
Well, I already kind of had him, in the top 10. He's definitely someone I'm targeting if I don't get a top tight end. I also probably Tony Gonzalez didn't like hearing that so much either because that was Matt Ryan's tight end early in his career too. So he's had some good tight ends. So for him to say that obviously is, Zoom call talk or your coach speak or whatever you want to say.
Lip service.
Yeah, it's certainly. I'm sure he's not the fastest nor the most athletic tight end that Matt Ryan has played with, but and they probably had little to no time together, so I'm not really sure where he's pulling that out of. But he's a guy that I targeted later rounds at tight end. So if anything, it solidifies the thought. But I think that's a lot of coach speak as far as I'm concerned.
All right, let's wrap things up, but we'll stay with the Falcons and let's talk about Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, he passes his physical. Adam Schefter announced that the Falcons immediately reported good things there. Now, if you look at Gurley's numbers last year, and obviously the Rams were really kind of holding back on his touches early on, but he was still getting anywhere from like 13 to 15 touches on average through the first half of the season. Did that number slightly increase in the second half? Yes, it did. And he got utilized more. He ended up, jumping into the end zone. Do you think the Falcons utilize him in similar fashion, kind of gradually ease him into the season so that way at the end they can kind of make that push? And would you draft Todd Gurley?
He is, to me, probably the hardest player to figure out this year. I've watched him his whole career. I didn't really care for him as much out of college, and then I saw him his rookie year. I'm like, wow, did I miss this one big time? When he's right, he is still one of the more explosive backs in football. He's a touchdown machine. Like you said, even with limited touches, he was still pumping out pretty decent numbers. I mean, you look at the end and think that they didn't play him all that much, and then towards the end, he did have some big games. If he's healthy, he's going to be great. He's going to be a fantasy bargain if he's healthy. The only problem is if he's going to be healthy. So I am having a hard time wondering if I'm going to pull the trigger once some real drafts start. I've done a lot of mocks so far, and obviously it's easy to pull the trigger then. But yeah, with no real competition for carries, I mean, let's face it, neither guy behind him is any good.
No.
the run is there for him if he can handle it. So I don't know how much can they ease him in. They brought in, he's kind of their big splash of the offseason. I kind of feel like they brought him in to work him. I figured if they were going to ease him a little bit, they would have brought some sort of other veteran in, not Brian Hill and Ito Smith, and I figured they're gonna use him and hope he holds up. I mean, but I am ultra nervous, about Todd Gurley, but I love the talent. I really do.
Where are you seeing him go in mocks right now?
I just went in doing a fishbowl mock right now. I believe I'm in the 5th round of a 12-teamer, and he just went like in the middle of the 5th round. So he's clearly not your first. He could be your 3rd, running back depending on your roster construction. Probably 2nd. So it's not a huge. It's not the risk of Dalvin Cook holding out. But 5th round, you're still getting a pretty good football player in the 5th round of fantasy league. So it'll hurt, but it won't knock you out.
All right. Good stuff as always, Ryan. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Big thanks to our producer, Matt Sells, for, as always, bringing the heat via producer extraordinaire. We got lots of stuff coming up in the next several days between another Table That discussion or 2 Table That discussions, and then a whole mess of other 5-on-5s, 3-point plays, and more Fantasy Alarm sports talk. Get the NFL draft guide at fantasyalarm.com/NFL draft guide. Use one word right there. Lock in that $19.97 price, 50% off right now for an early bird special. Give us a follow on Facebook, fantasyalarm.com. Give us a follow on Twitter at fantasyalarm. Give us a follow on Instagram too. That's right. I've been working on that. Did you see my Instagram post yesterday?
Yeah, I did. The dog pooping. Yeah. Don't forget about YouTube too.
Don't forget about YouTube. You can find all of our videos all in one fell swoop right there. Just type Fantasy Alarm in the search bar and you'll end up being able to grab that. So, Ryan, I thank you as always for your time. Always a pleasure. Thanks that quarantine haircut. Looking sharp.
Talk to you again.
Absolutely. That's going to do it for us here on Fantasy Alarm Sports Talk. Thanks for joining us here. I'm Howard Bender. We'll catch you next time.